Last Shift is one of the most underrated horror movies of all time. It came out in 2015, and I really never hear anybody recommend it. I don't know if it's because it's not an iconic slasher movie or it's not a psychological horror like the genre has become really oversaturated with, but what I do know, it is actually scary. This movie does away with something I've always found frustrating in horror movies where the danger or hauntings just randomly stop. If I talked about the horror and imagery, this would be an hour and 30-minute long video. That's because the longer you watch, the more you realize that the hauntings start 5 minutes in and literally just never end. If you haven't seen this movie, you should really go watch it right now. But if you're still here, let's get into it. The movie starts off with one of the only actual characters in the entire movie, Jess. She's sitting in her car talking to her mom before her first shift as a police officer. Her mom is trying to talk her out of it because of the dangers of being an officer, and when Jess says most cops go their entire career without seeing action, her mom responds really casually with, "Yeah, we'll tell that to your father," which is an insane thing to say when we get more context later on in the movie. But anyway, Jess tells her mom that she loves her and hangs up and goes into the station. We are introduced to Sergeant Cohen in a really comedic way, by the way. Intentional or not, this always cracks me up.
Hello?
How long you been there?
I just walked in. I'm Officer
Turn
Lowe.
around.
My order said to report
I
you.
said turn around! Stop! I'm Sergeant Cohen.
We get the exposition dump for the setting of the movie, where we are told there's a new police station and that Jess will be working the last shift at this station. We are told that anyone who comes in should be sent to the new station, and all 911 calls will be routed to the new station as well. So Jess asks the obvious question: why is she there instead of a security guard if no policing will actually be done? Cohen tells us that the biohazard people were supposed to come earlier to pick up the last of the evidence that they can't just throw out because it's covered in blood and other bodily fluids. But they never ended up making it. So they're told that they were going to be out between like 10 p.m. and 4 a.m. He says there's no reason to not have an officer on the force do the same thing as a security guard would do, and stresses to not leave the building until Bio has arrived. Just a little bit after her shift starts, she starts falling asleep at the reception desk, which is kind of crazy because it's like 9 p.m. at this point, and like she knew she was going to be working the night shift. Was she not prepared at all? Anyway, eventually she gets a phone call from a distressed woman saying she's trapped and needs help. Without context, she says,
I think they might all be dead.
before she hangs up. Jess calls the new station and tells them about the ominous call she got, but ultimately nothing can be done because the call has been disconnected and no important information was given. Jess also brings up that the calls were supposed to be rerouted, and the officer on the other line says that they were, but he will confirm that it is actually the case. The phone call concludes and Jess hears some banging towards the back of the station. She doesn't identify where it's coming from, but she does find the lunchroom, where she decides to eat lunch. It's 10 p.m. at this point, so like I guess she's just not eating for the rest of her shift. Like we're an hour in, you know, oh, whatever. Um, she finds a long dark hair in the sandwich she's eating and almost throws up. Which like yeah would be gross if Jess also didn't have long dark hair. Like she doesn't even consider that this could be hers and just almost throws up before throwing away her only food for the night. Immediately after, though, we hear banging on a door, and when Jess goes to investigate, she eventually finds what appears to be a homeless man inside. Jess asks him to leave, and he instead pees on the floor and says,
Shut
Jesus.
which is pretty based, but ultimately Jess is not based and forces him out for it. She then wanders around the station, building the atmosphere for the movie, and eventually ends up at the officer's old locker room. Here she finds her father's old locker with a picture of the two together. She thinks about taking the photo, but decides against it, which I don't really understand, even with full movie context. But right after we get our first concrete something's not right moment, where all of the lockers in the room that were closed before are now open, but before Jess can even process that, the phone rings again. It's the same girl from earlier, and Jess actually gets some information this time, such as her name being Monica, she was taken to a ranch, and she thinks she hears pigs before hanging up again. As soon as this call ends, Jess gets a call from Bio Cleanup saying they're running behind. Jess then calls a new station to relay the new info about Monica. The officer on the other line states that she cannot be dialing 911 and is calling the old station's number directly as all calls have definitely been rerouted. However, despite the new information, it's still not enough to get the search for Monica underway. As soon as this call ends, the cabinets behind Monica start moving on their own, and while she's investigating, she hears loud clattering from the back of the station. She goes to check that out instead. She finds that a back door to the station has been broken into, and when she tries to radio it in, she's met with this.
I repeat, possible code 9.
The power then goes out, and the clattering from earlier appears to be very close to her now. She finds a homeless man from earlier digging through evidence boxes, just turns the power back on, and takes him to holding. The man is super reluctant to enter the cell, and as soon as Jess gets him in the cell, this happens. While trying to get out of the cell, she sees something with a bloody sheet over its face, drops her flashlight, and backs away from the door. She then hears heavy breathing, and her flashlight is picked up and being flashed at her. She believes it to be the homeless man until she looks over and sees he is unconscious on the floor. We hear a girl ominously whispering to Jess that she's going to hurt her, before we see a flash of entities behind Jess wearing bloody sheets before the power comes back on. From the phone call ending to now, it's been almost 9 minutes of unbroken horror, and that's what this movie excels at. You find yourself waiting for a break or a relief from the danger that is presented to us, and they are so few and far between that you are never taken out of it. That being said, we do get one now, though, when Jess decides to go sit down and relax. However, when she reclines in her chair, she sees the word "so" carved with blood into the ceiling. She gets up and begins making sure all of the doors are locked, where she finds a woman named Marigold outside smoking a cigarette. Jess tells her to leave, and Marigold asks if she can at least finish her smoke first. Jess relents, and Marigold starts telling her about how she was in the cell next to the 3 wannabe Manson family that night. Jess says that the 3 members that Marigold are referring to Jess says the 3 members that Marigold is referring to were killed on scene and they never made it to the station. Marigold says that was what was reported, but that's not what happened. She says the 3 of them next door kept up all night singing an eerie song, which is the song we heard on the radio earlier in the movie. She tells us that it suddenly stopped when they hung themselves with their own bed sheets. The story upsets Marigold enough that she's ready to go, and Jess returns back inside. Upon re-entering, she finds a TV on in a room, playing footage from the aforementioned cult members. The other TVs start playing various POVs of the interview, where we hear one of the girl cult members saying that she once stabbed a girl that sounded like a pig while laughing manically. This is reminiscent of earlier when Monica told Jess that she thought she heard pigs. Everything else is just cult nonsense that honestly goes on for just a little too long, but it ends with the leader saying,
I like you. I'm gonna come back for you and all you love.
before the office chairs in the room start flying at Jess. We get some visuals of the deceased members in the chairs, but Jess, I can't actually see them because they're always behind her. The phone rings and it's Monica again. She tells Jess that they killed the other girls and they won't stop singing. Monica starts singing the song, and it's the same reoccurring song. Jess gets Monica's last name and age and tells her to hang up and call 911. But Monica says, only redial is working? Haven't ever heard of this before, and I don't think we need an explanation because she hangs up almost right after saying this. I guess for just explaining things that don't need explained with nonsense, I guess. Whatever. Jess relays new information to the officer from the other station, and also says she believes the remaining members of the Payman family have her. The Payman family being the cult family we've been learning about. The phone call ends, and Jess hears someone whistling the song we've been hearing somewhere in the station. Not finding anything except... And then she thinks the other members of the police force are playing a prank on her, I guess. Does she think they are literal deities? Like, how could somebody do this as a prank? She's in an awfully jolly mood now because she no longer thinks she's being haunted, I guess, and hears the door buzzer. So she runs up to the door where she's greeted by another officer, Ryan. She confronts him about the alleged prank, and the guy has no clue what she's talking about. He says he just came over to check on her before she finally relents on the prank allegations. He asks if he can come in, and some light flirting happens, which is the first and honestly the last moment of extended relief we get in the entire movie. Ryan reveals what happened to Jess's father, recounting that he was with him that night. Jess already knew what happened, obviously, but this is the first time we find out that he was shot and killed at the Payman house. Which makes the line from her mom, like, way more out of pocket. Just as like, haha, yeah, most cops never even see action. And her mom's like, yeah, well, tell that to your dead dad who was shot and killed last year, idiot. This moment of exposition and relief is broken when Ryan says he's got to go back to his shift. And when leaving, it is revealed that there's a massive bullet hole in the back of his head. This entire interaction happened with the deceased officer. This is something that happens a few times in the movie where we think we are getting relief, but the whole time something malicious was actually happening. She has no time to process this, as she hears whispers from the members of the Payman family before getting this haunting sight. She then hides, but when she looks back, whatever it was is gone. She hears the homeless man begging for help from his cell, and when she goes to check on him, she sees the Payman family hanging behind him. She tells him it's not real, and then basically just abandons him. Maybe I was wrong. Maybe Jess is a little bit based. She then hears the song again, but this time very clearly, and finds a group of young girls singing the song before the door slams and they disappear. She then calls Cohen and says she doesn't think she can stay the rest of the night, and he says the apple must have fallen pretty far from the tree if she can't handle basically being a security guard, and asks if he should let the captain know she's resigning or if he will see her in the morning at the end of her shift. I have mixed feelings about this because if someone called me at 1 in the morning saying they thought they were seeing ghosts, I'd probably act the same way. However, if we look back at the beginning of the movie, I think it's implied that Cohen knows that the station is haunted. It's never explicitly said, but it's heavily suggested with certain dialogue throughout certain parts of the movie. Jess says that she will see him at the end of her shift, and he says not to call again. She decides she's going to wait in her squad car until bio cleanup arrives, which is a pretty good idea to be honest. But then she hears the phone ring, so she runs back inside, as it's Monica. Monica explains the killers are right next to her, while Jess is trying to get a hold of officers to send her to her location. When they answer, Monica has already hung up. However, they inform Jess that Monica Young was the last victim from the Payman family. The officer on the other line also says she might be getting messed with, but that there's another reason that they decided to move buildings other than it being old, and that many believe it was haunted. Jess has to hang up as something drops a photo next to her from the crime scene of her dead father, which is the start of a trail of photos from all of the victims from that night, including Ryan from earlier. She eventually starts hearing voices getting louder and distorted, causing her to pass out, only to be awoken by a phone call from her mom. All of the photos from earlier are gone, but while on the phone, she realizes the belt that has her gun on it is missing. So she hangs up on her mom in a panic, and she sees a girl walking down the hallway. She chases after her before being knocked out by her own baton. When she wakes up, she's face to face with someone else from the Payman family who's still alive. After some dialogue, eventually the Payman says it's the 1-year anniversary of the Payman family death and that she's there to celebrate. She then uses Jess's gun to join the other Payman members that died in the prison. Jess again has no time to process any of this because the phone is ringing again, and this is the last phone call we get from Monica, as when Jess tells the caller that Monica is dead, the caller starts manically laughing before the desk starts shaking violently. She sees what I think is Monica under the desk. I don't have a great reason to think this, and the fact that the entity's face is really messed up, and we were told that Monica died via baseball bat to the face. So, Jess is thoroughly ready to leave at this point, but finds the door to the station cannot be opened or even shot through. She then receives a call on her cell phone from her deceased father, and he tells her that he's proud of her for being loyal to the job. And when she says, "I did it for you," he asks what she's trying to leave the station for then. And she apologizes for doing that. Like, I think it's really obvious why she's trying to leave. I'm gonna be honest. I don't think she's being unreasonable at all here. He then tells her the man who killed him is still in the station, and he wants her to do something about it, before we see the homeless man from earlier walk behind Jess. When she goes to detain him again, we see that this is another trick, as the man's face distorts before the lights go out. When she gets her flashlight, the man is gone, so she goes to the holding cell to see that the homeless man is actually hung in his cell, with his hands still handcuffed behind his back. We get another bloody sheet person jump scare, causing Jess to fall back, and when she recovers, the hanging man and the jump scare are gone. But there's now a sheet in the room with the scene of the Paymans hanging themselves being projected onto it. She leaves the cell in a panic and sees Ryan in the hall. We obviously know Ryan isn't real, so he uses his fingers to reenact his death and just runs towards an exit. Here she sees the picture of her and her father on the exit, which stops her from leaving. She gets another call from her dad at this moment, who tells her they're coming and you have to stop them. At the same time, we hear someone breaking into the station. She draws her gun and runs towards the noise. She sees intruders with sheets over their heads, and she starts chasing and shooting them one by one until she is shot herself by Sergeant Cohen. We pan over, and it's revealed that she has been shooting the guys from BioClean. The movie ends with Jess pleading that's not what she saw, and Cohen calling into the station for assistance. Jess is muttering the song heard throughout the movie, and we see a vision of the Paymans coming up and putting a bag over her head. We can say for certain that this isn't like a case of delusion or whatever, because a lot of times throughout the movie we see the entities, but Jess doesn't. What I think is more likely is that the ghost of the Payman family influenced her by pretending to be her dad on the phone and making the BioClean people look like cult members. This would explain the insane phone call earlier where her dad is like, "No, don't leave, stay on the haunted police station and avenge me." This movie in the grand scheme doesn't even have much going on, which is what makes it so much more impressive that it's this immersive. This movie is just nonstop horror and tension from start to end, especially when you consider the opening sequence is likely Cohen frustrated with the hauntings, and the calls from Monica have been an entity the entire time. Every break from horror is only an illusion, which makes almost every moment of the movie great. If you didn't watch it before this review, I spoiled a lot of it, but it's so good that you can still enjoy it knowing everything ahead of time. I can't recommend this movie enough. That's all for this one. If you enjoyed, like, comment, and subscribe. I've been Kali, and I'll see you in the next one.